Welcome to READ, the Research Education Advocacy Podcast. READ connects you with researchers, educators, and thought leaders on current research and best practices in education and child development. READ is produced by the Windward Institute. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Gomez, and I am so lucky to have had the opportunity to chat with and learn from a legend in reading education, Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Truly, as a Swiftie, Dr. Hasbrouck is on a Taylor Swift level. I've learned so much from her, and I know so many of you in the READ community have learned and continue to learn from Dr. Hasbrouck. She has been in the midst of her conference tour, connecting with educators and researchers around the world. And in fact, I just got to see her speak at the International Dyslexia Association Conference, where she received the Samuel Tory Orton Award for her contributions in connecting the broader audience in the understanding and advocacy of dyslexia. Dr. Hasbrouck's expertise centers on reading instruction, assessment, and intervention, which we tackle in this conversation. And she talks a lot about supporting all students, but particularly students with reading disabilities like dyslexia. Today, we talk extensively about fluency, what it is and what it isn't, how it factors into reading comprehension, and how teachers can be detectives on how we truly support our students in all of their reading goals. There are so many juicy segments for learning. I felt like I was sitting with Dr. Hasbrouck on a coffee shop. Just that's how personal our conversation got and just how much I truly learned from her. And I hope that you learned so many other things as well that you can apply right away. So as always, happy learning, and I'll see you after the episode, readers. Dr. Hasbrouck, welcome to the READ podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited that you are here. I just recorded my intro for you, and I'll say this. The readers know I'm a Swiftie. I have used Taylor Swift references in the past, but I did equate you to Taylor Swift in the reading world. And so I think you can see my excitement. I had to say that before we started recording.
Well, that's pretty extraordinary. I from a different vantage point and watching the phenomenon that is Taylor Swift. So I don't know that I agree with you that I'm in that kind of stratosphere, but I'm honored that you make that connection.
Well, I am manifesting a little bit, and I'm probably just giving a preview because when this episode comes out, it actually will be exclusive, a first listen for our attendees at International Dyslexia Association, as well as our READ subscribers. And then this will be released to the masses in November, coming off Dyslexia Awareness Month and International Dyslexia Association Conference, which you have just won the Samuel Orton Award. And so I know there's going to be so many people learning from you, and I am just so grateful to have you here. So we'll get started. I mean, a lot of our readers, if not all of our readers, know who you are, have learned from you from decades. Even I learned from you as I was in my dissertation on coaching, reading your book and your research on student-focused coaching. And so before I get into a diatribe about who you are, I'd like to know more, in your own words, your story and your journey of your professional background.
Well, thank you, Danielle. And it's fun to have the opportunity to reminisce a little bit. But I do, when I'm thinking about my journey, it's a pretty long one at this point. So I have to do the highlights reel, if they say. But it's easy to trace my origins back to my childhood, where I really always wanted to be a teacher. Some people pick their career early on and are lucky enough to have it fulfilled. And it turns out to, for me, exceed my expectations. Never dreamed of all the opportunities and exciting things that I've been able to do. But I did start off as a reading teacher. The one thing that changed a lot at the beginning was what I was going to teach. I knew it was teaching, but as I went through the grades, everything I was experiencing, loved it. I was one of those kids who learned to read really easily. I loved everything about school. So when I'm in fourth grade, I want to be a fourth grade teacher. When I'm in middle school, I want to be a middle school teacher. But I ended up in reading at the suggestion of a high school English teacher. I hadn't really thought about that because I had no exposure with kids who struggled with reading. But she planted a seed, and I ended up going in that direction. So I was a reading teacher, reading specialist, which evolved as does for some careers. I was asked to take on the role of a reading coach, which led to what you were saying, my development with a lot of input from a lot of people of the student-focused coaching model, which continues to exist and flourish today. So I had that role, and that led into opportunities to be a professor. I worked at the University of Oregon and then at Texas A&M University in educational psychology. So, of course, when you're a researcher at a high-level tier 1 university, you're doing lots of research as well. So I got to do that kind of work. But that pull of teaching was always something that kept me connected to schools and to teachers. And that continues to this day. I just reached out to my grandson. I live in Seattle. My grandson lives just real close to me. He's going into 7th grade this year, but he's in a K-8 school. So when he was in kindergarten, when he entered that school, I went right over to the school and volunteered to help out and got to know his kindergarten teacher really well. And I just reached out to her yesterday and said, I'm around the next couple of weeks. Would you like me to help out in your classroom with that beginning of the year assessments? I did that the last couple of years. And so next week I'll be working with little kids and finding out if they know their letter sounds and all the language, and if they're ready to go, and help the teachers make those decisions for those kids. So it feels in many ways like a circle. I started working with little kids, and I still get to do that a little bit.
I love that you're still grounded in the classroom. It's funny you say that. There's been a couple of experts, Margie Gillis being one, who I speak to, and they still, including you, communicate how you're still working with children. She was working with her granddaughter. But the fact that you had this inspiration from your grandson to go back into the classroom and you're still doing it today, I mean, wow, how special is it right now for a kindergartner to be sitting in their classroom and getting expert assessments from you and that kindergarten teacher? What a special moment. So you're right, full circle. And it's, as we talk about full circle too, one of the things I was thinking about when I was preparing for this interview was reflecting and reading a lot about your work throughout decades, working with educators on how to improve literacy in their classrooms and schools, from working with that one teacher on the micro level to presenting to inevitably thousands, and maybe at this point, millions of educators worldwide. And as you think about your story and perhaps the macro trends of literacy now, how would you evaluate these trends in literacy in the recent decades? Has anything changed? Perhaps have the needs of teachers transformed? And then I'll pick in a third question. Like, what are some of these hot topics that you seem to be hearing right now?
Yeah. Well, yeah, things do change over time for sure. And definitely classrooms are changing, at least in the United States, which I can speak to most because I observe it more often. The demographics of the kids that are in our public schools is changing. Our country is changing, and that's reflected in the public schools. And COVID played a role in that, but it's teaching in a public school was always a challenging thing, and it's enormously more challenging now for a whole variety of reasons in, I would say, most communities. I don't know of any communities where those kinds of shifts haven't occurred, many shifts on many different levels. And are we preparing and supporting teachers to deal with all of that? I don't think we are. And thinking about preparing teachers, that's one of the things that I have not seen shifted much. Right. There's some shift, but it's very frustrating to many of us who see the growing interest and, dare I say, hunger on the part of teachers to access this evidence base about how we teach children to read and how we can help more children be successful. That information is still not fully represented in universities that are preparing our teachers. So teachers are still coming out, even our those K-1, 2 teachers, where it's so absolutely necessary that they be grounded in that solid body of evidence we have about how to do that challenging thing of helping kids learn to read, write, and spell. They don't know how to do it. And it may be 2 or 3 years or more before they get access. Our school leaders came through that system, and many of them are not aware of all this information or how to successfully implement it. So that is a hot topic, certainly in some circles, is teacher preparation and how we can help universities make the shift that is absolutely necessary for the future. We could say probably the future of our country. If we don't have a literate population, we're in dire trouble. So those are some of the things that I've seen in my work across the years, that this always challenging job is even more challenging.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that too. I like how you brought in a lot of different facets of literacy and so many aspects of the way that we should be teaching students literacy, and particularly with the teacher prep programs. I think that's really important. I think, to echo what you said, teachers are hungry, right? And the one thing that keeps me continuously passionate is that this hunger, right? That there is so much information, evidence to support reading instruction, professionals, experts like yourself who are delivering this information, right? It's now, how do we get this to the hands of teachers? And so I want to dive deeper from the macro trends to a facet of reading, and that is fluency. You're an expert in fluency. You spent decades researching it, providing teacher training, professional development, teacher preparation on fluency. And the one thing that's really unique about fluency, I guess maybe not that unique, but fluency itself is such a weighted term. And when we spoke last week in preparation for this interview, you said fluency continues to surprise me. And initially, I was going to state some definitions from research and frameworks on fluency, where we see it in some of these research frameworks. I even was looking at the active view of reading, and they were talking about fluency as a bridging process. And so there's a lot, I think, that teachers are still hungry for. I'm continuously hungry for, to learn more about fluency. So how would you operationalize fluency, and what makes it so complex in reading?
I think one of the things that makes it so complex in reading is this fact that it gets conflated with speed so often. I don't know if that's the cause of the complexity, but it just seems to be the issue that I continue to help teachers and specialists, administrators, parents grapple with, that this thing that has speed or rate as part of it is not about getting kids to read fast. And the complexity is, now I have the gift of, I think our profession has the gift of Scarborough's rope as this elegant visual metaphor for this complex thing. And I use it always in my workshops, that drawing people's attention to that. We need to spend a lot of time at the beginning of the rope and all of those strands. And as Dr. Scarborough reminds us, those strands are individually identified in the infographic. It has to be, but they are not developed separately. They are developed. They develop together. They reinforce each other. They're reciprocal. So that can be a misunderstanding. But for my work, I draw people's attention to that tightly woven rope at the very end, which is a visual metaphor, a representation of fluency. That's what fluency looks like. And she labels it right above there, the skillful, effortless, intertwining and application of all these individual skills. So that's the complexity of fluency. It is not a skill. It is an outcome of mastery of individual skills that have become intertwined to the point of effortless automaticity through orthographic mapping of words and all kinds of things. Yeah, it's way more complex than most people think of. And rate is part of that, but it isn't what fluency is all about. The big payoff of fluency, I think most teachers do say fluency they know it's important. I think most teachers understand it's important because of comprehension,
right?
But they may not have really thought deeply about why. And rate is part of that, but accuracy is the other major part of that. And when we take those two things, accuracy and rate, and put them together, that is automaticity.
Right.
So, and we need to be thinking about that. Teachers need to be thinking about that in early stages of kindergarten, weeks or months before they're ever going to attempt to read a sentence. We need to be thinking about laying the foundation for that tightly woven rope.
I can just close my eyes and picture the rope right now.
Yeah.
I like how you brought that apart and you brought in that visual of Scarborough's reading rope. I think the one thing I need a little more help understanding is how you differentiate between passage reading fluency and fluency as a whole, right? So you did help us understand that through Scarborough, but perhaps that you can walk us through those skills, because there's word reading fluency, there's letter naming fluency, and then there's passage level fluency. Can you help differentiate all those pieces and how those sort of are related in that sense?
Well, I can try, and I appreciate you using the term passage reading fluency. I think one of the ways that we get in a little bit of trouble as professional educators is we use terms a little too broadly sometimes and throw them around, like the term fluency. Fluency by itself has meaning outside of reading. We all understand about a musician that plays beautifully and fluently, learning a language so that you not just can barely speak it, but you speak it fluently. Those are very different things. Math fact fluency. We all get that. We understand what that is. And then we talk about reading fluency and assume we know what we're talking about. But that tightly woven rope that really represents passage reading fluency, we should discuss it that way, because as you're saying, to get to passage reading fluency, text reading fluency, some researchers refer to it, we need fluency of all of those individual component skills. And that is, acquiring that fluency is totally effortless for some children.
Right.
Maybe about 5% of children. Involves some guidance and effort for some. For some, it is the traditional types of instruction around, these are the letter names, these are the letter sounds. Here's how you blend them. Here's how you segment them if you want to write them. Here's how you form the letters. Each of those individual skills, we need to help the student move toward automaticity, accuracy, and rate. Handwriting, segmenting, blending, word recognition, letter recognition, sound recognition, all of those have fluency built into them. Marianne Wolf and Katzer-Cohen reminded us this in an article in 2001, that passage reading fluency develops in progression. So if we're really precise as professionals talking about all those components, how do we get to passage reading fluency? We build automaticity in the component skills. And I'd rather use the term automaticity when we're talking about reading rather than fluency, because I like to reserve fluency for when we're reading and the third component of prosody or expression comes in.
Right.
We don't worry about prosody or expression with letter names and letter sounds and those kind of things. So, and when we use the term fluency for that, we're taking prosody away. That's what makes it complex. But if we embrace the term automaticity, build a skill to automaticity, which starts always with accuracy,
right?
Then rate, Then we move to a level of reasonable automaticity. And we don't do that one skill at a time, one letter at a time. We're doing this multifaceted. We work at the bottom of the rope in word recognition. We work at the top of the rope with language comprehension, the syntax, the semantics, the background knowledge, vocabulary. Oh my gosh, it's such a juggling act.
Yeah,
but fluency or automaticity plays a big role every step of the way.
Yeah. I do want to circle back to what you've been talking about, is that none of these skills are isolated, that it's multi-component.
Yeah.
I think Scarborough's reading rope does an exceptional job on that, but I think it's worth reminding, right, that we're not just taking a list. It's like this isn't this is not your shopping list. Maybe this is taking all the ingredients and making a beautiful reading cake. I don't know, but I like how you said the juggling aspects of it. And I also appreciate how you walk through all those progressions, right, of these critical word reading skills that you need to build for automaticity, for text reading fluency, as well as bringing in some of these other language comprehension skills, which are equally critical. You also talked about these other misconceptions, right, that maybe we often think about fluency as rate, but accuracy and automaticity are really important. When you're talking about fluency, we're specifying text reading fluency. What are maybe can you help us flesh out some of these perhaps common misconceptions, or what are some other common misconceptions that we might see in applying fluency to practice?
Well, one that's coming to mind, and it might not be what you're really thinking of, so I want you to dig deeper, but this idea of the threshold requirement of these skills in order to achieve comprehension is still problematic. Administrators, leaders, parents, so many classroom teachers leap to comprehension, as they so rightfully should, as that's the important goal. Yes, it is. It's the whole purpose of all of this. It has no meaning. Phonics has no meaning. Phonemic awareness, vocabulary by itself. No, it's all in service of comprehension. So because of that, teachers who know that so well, they look at their students who can't comprehend text and spend extraordinary amount of times trying to fix or remediate or intervene with comprehension. And that is so, I don't want to use the term misguided, because it's exactly the way they should be thinking about it. But fluency in all of those component skills is going to be necessary. So if they don't comprehend, we need to back up in the rope a little bit and see why they may be stuck. And when I'm doing workshops and using Scarborough's rope, we back up, because I'm often talking to people who are interested in intervention, and we can see the middle of the rope where the strands are beginning to come together, but they're not tightly woven. That's really normal, typical, expected progression for about a second grader. That's what second grade reading or second grade reading looks like. That's expected. But when we have fourth graders reading like that, or eighth graders reading like that, or adults reading like that, that's what we need to pay attention to. And why are they stuck there? We have to become diagnosticians at that point, detectives, and figure out why. For some kids, all of those strands, in fact, have been sufficiently developed. They simply are not sufficiently automatic. They don't have that they haven't practiced enough with scaffolding and support to weave it together. That is true for some kids. Yeah. But just so I'm getting to a misconception. Kids who don't comprehend, even if the teachers understand, they need to be fluent, they will look at those kids and do fluency intervention, just getting the kids to read text more fluently. That's not a bad idea. They need that. But why did they get stuck there? Is it possible that there are some weaknesses in the language part or the text recognition part that, in addition to simply practicing fluency, should be targeted for intervention? So that this goes back to where we started, is that this is complex stuff, and each individual child it needs to be diagnosed, if you will, to figure out if they are struggling with this, why are they struggling with it?
Yeah. First of all, I just love how you asked me to dig deeper. I love, as someone whose value is curiosity, and especially in the podcast, I always love digging deeper. So I love that you said that. Second part, I think I just want to echo is that we've established that fluency is a critical part of comprehension, right? And you also talked about these challenges, right? So can you help us then dig deeper a little bit in the classroom? Let's say we have a group of students in front of us, and we see some children having difficulty, perhaps with comprehension, and we know that they have some fluency difficulties. Are there typical signs that maybe children might show when they're struggling with this? Or, I should say, and maybe, how do we then be detectives or diagnosticians? What are those, I think, maybe first steps that we can use to really get to the bottom of the skills that the students really need?
Yeah. Well, another love of mine, I don't think we've even used that term yet in our conversation, is assessments, the value assessments. Many of the trainings and the work that I do with teachers is around how do we as professional educators effectively and efficiently use assessments. And that's another area where I think many teachers, maybe most teachers, are insufficiently trained. They do not know what those assessments are. They don't have access to them, or they don't think they do, because these days we've got the internet. And most of the assessments that can really inform us as detectives or diagnosticians are readily available for free. I mean, there are some excellent assessments that we can purchase, but you don't need to be a school psychologist. You don't need to be a special educator. You don't need to be a trained diagnostician. Every classroom teacher, especially in those critical early grades, K1, 3, but beyond that, should have knowledge about and access to efficient, quick, short. They don't need to spend. What classroom teacher could spend even 15 minutes doing a one-on-one assessment with each of their children? So I often talk about, in terms of doing these type of assessments, what they are. I will get to the answer for that. But we need to think about differentiating. We're using that term differentiating in instruction. Most schools these days, I hope, are doing some form of multi-tiered support systems, MTSS. They're understanding tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 instruction. We're talking a lot about differentiating instruction to meet the needs of different kids. We're talking about that in instruction. We need to talk about that in assessment as well. So, and it follows a medical model really, really beautifully in my mind, that if we think in the medical world, those of us who are lucky enough to be really healthy, we need assessments, so to speak, from our physician once a year. If we have some kind of health issue, which is not necessarily chronic, but we've broken a leg, or we've got COVID or whatever, we need a little bit more help, and therefore a little bit more assessment from our physician. If you are critically ill or in a horrific accident, you're ultimately, the most severe might be in intensive care, and their assessments are 24/7. It's the doc. And all of that, though, is driven by the need for the physician to have information to guide their decisions. Little information needed if you're generally well, a little bit more if you've got a health issue, a heck of a lot if you're really, really in danger. We need to be thinking about that. So in the classroom, where we hope most of our kids are tier 1, some tier 2, the tier 1 level for universal screening that's relevant to fluency are 3 times a year universal screeners. That is equivalent to taking the blood pressure, the body temperature, the cholesterol level check that our physician would do for everybody.
Right.
Then comes the diagnostic assessments, the tier 2 level assessments that we want classroom teachers to have their hands on to figure out what's going on. My kids aren't at bench. If they are at benchmark, great. Let's just keep doing the instruction. It seems to be working for these kids. But these are not. What do we do with those kids? We don't just leap to, this is another big misunderstanding. They're not at benchmark on a fluency-based assessment, letter naming fluency, oral reading fluency. So let's put them in a fluency intervention. That's not a bad idea, but why are they not at benchmark? So depending on the age of the student, we would then do diagnostic assessments of the components of word reading.
Right. Can you name a few, just that some of our listeners, some of the components that we talked about?
Yes. One of the first things I would do for a student, say, I'll just pick a fourth grade student who's not at benchmark. I'm going to sit with that student and have some passages for them to read. Can you read? And they don't have to read for long minutes. I will give them a fourth grade passage. Maybe you just had a bad day on that screening day. So let me see, can you read fourth grade assessment, fourth grade passage? I'm going to know within seconds. No, that's too hard. I'm going to try a third grade. I'm going to try a second grade. I'm going to find out about where the rope is woven for them. If this fourth grader can in fact read and understand second grade text, that's good news. Some things are going well there. But what is it about the third grade text that made it too hard? It was probably some of the individual words in the text. So check that student's phonics and decoding ability on a quick phonics screener. What kind of words can you decode? What can't you decode? If they're really having difficulty even decoding words, we then might do a phonemic awareness check, like pull things apart at that level. Always when I'm meeting with students, I'm always checking at the top of the rope too, often very informally, just as I'm having conversations with them or I'm asking questions about what we just read. I can do a quick check of their language comprehension, their syntax, their semantics, their background knowledge, their vocabulary. I do that usually quite informally. If an orange or red flag starts to come up, I can go then look for a more formal language evaluation opportunity. But most of the informal diagnostic assessments would include passage reading aloud, short periods of time, and then a check of are you understanding what you've phonics if they're not at grade level, phonemic awareness if their phonics is really weak, and then always paying attention to language.
Yeah. I love that you brought that story in of the fourth grade student. I always like to think about how we connect the science with the story. And I think bringing in a lot of those additional processes, those assessments, helps to provide your detective, right? You're providing that overall picture, that story of that child holistically, right? Where are their strengths? And I think when you talk about doing even additional assessments at the top of the road, the comprehension skills, even looking at all the word reading skills, you're looking for those areas where you might need to address or monitor or intervene, as well as the strengths that are going to help mitigate some of those challenges that you had. So I really like how you brought in that whole picture there. And I think also too, I'll just say this as someone, our team at the Windward Institute does extensive professional development throughout the year, both in the broader community through some workshops and courses, as well as doing individual consulting and coaching opportunities with professional development. And time again, assessment seems to be the question that a lot of these teachers have and these administrators have. And you did mention fourth grade, so that would be more of an upper elementary student. But can you provide a little bit more context for even some of these older students? We have a number of teachers that come in that are teachers of middle school, even some lower upper high school students with children that have inevitable fluency issues, maybe passage reading issues, text reading issues. So can you talk a little bit more about how that would look like for older students in assessment, particularly? I'm even thinking maybe some ORF measures, some oral reading fluency measures, passage reading measures that really could help be detectives and be more effective and efficient for those children in the older grades?
Yeah. Well, I've done quite a bit of work at middle school level. And I actually, the procedure that I would use is very much the same. I would first want to know generally, about where their reading level is. I go back to Scarborough's rope, obviously, all the time. Like, how woven is their rope? That's what I'm looking for. I want to be very careful that when I talk about finding what their level is, I'm not trying to move us into the well-intentioned, but now proven faulty notion of simply matching kids to their just right level. And that's going to take care of everything. That's not what we're doing here. But it's helpful for me. I have a 7th grader in front of me, did not do well, and it was expected. By the time they get to middle school, those benchmark screening assessments surprise us much less often. Because we know they have a history. We're pretty sure they were not going to do well on an oral reading fluency check. And lo and behold, they didn't. They're well below benchmark. We need to answer the question, why? Why is this 7th grader not able to read 7th grade text? So I would, if I had the chance to meet with that student, I would want to do a quick check of about where they are. Are they almost there? They can read 6th grade text or 5th grade text. That's a different student than one that is stuck more back at the 3rd grade level. So quickly, we're not spending lots and lots of time doing this. It's a quick, and I have the advantage now of decades of doing this work. So I have this internal schematic built in. I can listen to a child read and make a fairly quick determination just because I've done this with so many students. But I think most teachers can do that without spending hours. So are you 5th, 6th grade-ish reading, you 7th grader? Are you 4th, 3rd? Are you 2nd, 1st? Those are really different kids. Once I've determined that, I don't say, okay, I'm done. You're a 3rd grade reader. I'm just going to put you in 3rd grade text. Why are you, as a 7th grader, only able to read and understand 3rd grade text? I'm going to pull out a phonics assessment, a quick screener. I'm not going to have you try to read CBC words because you are reading 3rd grade text. I think you can read CBC words. I'm going to suspect that the reason you can read 3rd grade text and not 5th grade text is multisyllable words. But I can check that out in less than a minute. And yes, that's the reason that the 7th grader cannot read 4th, 5th grade text, let alone 7th grade text, is because of lack of automaticity with multi-syllable words. So an intervention for that student would include fluency work, keep working to build automaticity at increasingly challenging text with lots and lots and lots of support, but have some time on a regular basis every day, multiple times a day, if possible, doing some intervention specifically targeted to multisyllable words, and just keep that going. And always language. I mean, we're going to check on language too. If one of the reasons they're stuck at 3rd grade level is because their English proficiency is not sufficiently developed, their vocabulary, their background knowledge, we always need, it can't just be the drill and kill on word recognition. It's this complexity needs to be addressed all the time. But for intervention, we can often target some things we need to spend most of our time on.
Right. Ooh, that's so good. I should have to sit in that for a second. You know what? The reason why I'm taking this pause is I think a challenge in podcasting sometimes is both balancing the quick, what do I do now information that I can listen to and learn from in the car, on my run, on a walk with my kids, well, maybe not my kids. I don't know, my dog, right? I take walks with my dog and I'm often have podcasts in my ears. And you balance that with the quick information with understanding the context and nuance of some of these often very complex issues and topics, right? And so for Fluency, I'm just so energized right now because when we started this conversation, you said Fluency is more complex than we think, or I don't remember exactly what you said, but something to that nature, right? And I'm just really just sitting in just how in depth we've really gone into Fluency as a skill, as a product, as an outcome, as a driver of reading comprehension. So I did want to take that moment to thank you for that.
Yeah.
We just talked a little bit about assessing students who have difficulties. So I'd be remiss both in this conversation and in really celebrating your career on the work that you've done to advocate for students with dyslexia. And Fluency is an essential skill for all readers and one that we should be particularly paying attention to for dyslexia. And so I'd like to really know more about your work and what you've learned in the space of advocating and educating people about students with dyslexia, and really take this moment to reflect on that work and what we should be thinking about, particularly as we move forward in advocating for children with dyslexia.
Okay, well, thank you for that opportunity to talk about those children near and dear to my heart. In part because I'm the mother of no longer a child. She's my child, but she's 44 years old now. But my daughter, my second child, has dyslexia. She's born with that brain. And I experienced the challenge of parenting a child with dyslexia in a very similar way to most people, I think, even though I was a reading specialist. I had a master's degree in reading. It's still, I had my parent lenses on, not my teacher lenses. And I have to say, as excellent as my training was, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about dyslexia. So it really wasn't something up front in my mind, and it took us a while to figure it out. So so there's many things to talk about. One of the things, whenever we talk about dyslexia, it's important to take a moment and recall that dyslexia is a language-based disorder, and it does occur on a spectrum. So that's one of the things that instantaneously makes dyslexia challenging to talk about, because it's not at all a one-size-fits-all kid and a label. And many students who have dyslexia have other comorbid challenges. A lot of children, some suspect the majority, have attention deficit disorder. A lot of the children, whether it's caused by their dyslexia or it just occurs with dyslexia, have social emotional challenges, depression and anxiety, but some don't. So it's not a one size fits all condition nor intervention. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's zero in on Fluency, because it's really, really relevant. What we know is that being a language-based disorder where these neuroatypical students have difficulty with the processing language and therefore learning to read, write, and spell is very difficult. One of the variations across dyslexia across languages is the fact that, and I'm sure many of the listeners, most of the listeners to this podcast know about the complexity of languages in terms of their transparency or lack of transparency. English being an extremely non-transparent, very complex, highly irregular language. Therefore, even kids without dyslexia often have a great deal of time trying to master reading and spelling in English, even if they don't have dyslexia. In other languages where their language is transparent, languages such as Korean, Finnish, Italian, and most other languages are much more transparent than English. But in highly transparent, very, very regular languages, Mm-hmm. Dyslexia is often the kids learn to read. It's not that we're not talking about the severe dyslexic, but a lot of kids who really have dyslexia with some adequate instruction learn to read quite adequately up until about, and they do quite well. It really doesn't manifest until older grades, because then it manifests as a fluency problem. Mm-hmm. They have learned to decode. They have learned to, if they have strong language, which a lot of our children with dyslexia have extraordinarily strong language, then their vocabulary and background knowledge is really strong. Therefore, they orthographically map letters, words quite easily. So they can manage and look like pretty good readers up until about third grade or so, where their brains cannot keep up with the demands for what we would call fluent reading. Spelling all along the way, even in some of those transparent languages, children with dyslexia may have problems with. But again, because it's transparent, and if they have good language skills and they have had some kind of adequate instruction, they do quite well.
Right.
Dyslexia manifests with fluency problems in transparent languages, where it's only one of the many challenges that our children who are learning to read, write, and spell in English. Fluency is just one of the problems, because just decoding the words is a big problem. So fluency and dyslexia are deeply intertwined, whereas some of the other things are a little bit less. So, yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting. And I'm so happy that we ended with that. I think there's so much to continue to learn and to understand about dyslexia. And it's helpful for me to clarify those aspects of dyslexia. My final question for you is in the dyslexia field, or even just in the field of reading, what are your hopes, or what are you interested in investing in more in how we intersect research, education, and advocacy for reading for children with dyslexia and beyond?
I am appreciative of the conversations that are arising now in the SOR, science of reading world, where there have been people reminding us that it's not just about the science of reading, how the brain becomes a reading brain. That's fascinating and essential information to have. But when we want to get that information into the hands of teachers and use it in the classroom, that secondary, or that aligned science of instruction, the science of instruction, the science of learning, we can't ignore that. It's not just about the components of reading and phonology and Scarborough's rope. All of that is fabulous information, and it is very exciting to watch how many teachers are getting that information. But then they have to go back in their classroom where they have 25, who knows, 30, 19, it doesn't matter. You got a whole bunch of kids, some of whom are sailing along, some of whom are moving just as they should, some who are lost and frustrated. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the wide diversity of children in our classrooms? And that's in the knowledge of how reading happens, but also how do we manage to design and deliver adequately differentiated instruction in real world classrooms.
Yeah.
It's a huge interest of mine, is helping teachers figure that out through collaboration, through coaching. It's the idea that one teacher can manage all that in their own individual classroom with no outside support. We need to say that's a fairy tale. We could do that in days when it was acceptable to say, okay, 25, 30% of my kids are just not going to make it. I accept that. Right. We don't accept that anymore, which means we can't ask individual teachers to do this work. We break down the walls, not literally. Open classrooms is not the solution to this, but we have to do a whole lot. We have to be wiser about that science, that information we have about good instruction, which includes good classroom management, and do a whole lot more collaborating in classrooms and in schools.
Oh, I love that ending of collaboration, empowerment of all of us. Dr. Hasbrouck, thank you for being on this episode of the Read Podcast. Thank you for your contribution to this field, to education at large. Thank you for just continuously teaching us and being committed to us and to empowering everyone in education in the world, truly. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Danielle, and for the good conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Read. To learn more from this episode or from past guests, you can visit readpodcast.org. If you are inspired from this episode, I invite you to check out further learning opportunities, resources, and articles at the Windward School homepage, thewindwardschool.org/WI. I also encourage you to stay engaged with us by connecting on social media and signing up for the Windward Institute's newsletters to learn more about upcoming professional development opportunities, resources, and events. Finally, if you have any ideas of topics and speakers, you can also reach out to me via email at info@readpodcast.org. Here's Dr. Hasbrouck with our final episode send-off.
Until next time, readers.
Thank you so much. Yay!